welcome everybody. This is, if you are looking for the 2023 Swanepoel Trends Report webinar, you're in the right place. We're having a bunch of people joining right now. Sorry, we got kicked off like 30 seconds late. We were trying to figure out who had the start the webinar controls, and as it turns out, it was Paul. So while we're getting everybody on the call, I'll quickly do a little introduction and talk about what we're going to be doing today. So my name is Jack Miller. I'm the president and CEO of T360. I've been with the firm since 2013 and have been working with Paul, I think, for at least the last 5 years on the Swanepoel Trends Report. Paul is our editor-in-chief for the report. He took over that role from Stefan last year. And this report is, I believe, Paul, the first report where you've really fully drove absolutely all the content, the research, everything this year.
End to end. Yep.
End to end.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
this was, Stefan, obviously has written the report for years and years and acted as the editor-in-chief. So this is Paul's inaugural year in that role. So we're excited about having you in that role, Paul. And I think that you've created a brilliant product for this year. So we're really delighted. So we got a few more people coming on, but we're going to go ahead to be respectful of everybody's time. We're going to get started. This call is being recorded. We will be pushing out a replay. So if you showed up a little late, you're not going to miss anything. We'll push it out. So again, my name is Jack Miller. I'm the president and CEO of T360. If you're looking for our webinar overviewing the trends report, you showed up in the right place, and we're going to get started now. So Paul, tell us a little bit about what goes into the trends report and the work that the team does. Like, give the audience a little bit of background on kind of how we put the report together and what it looks like, and then we'll jump into some of the content from this year's report.
Great. The report comes out every year. It has for the last 18 years, and it's designed to be a strategic tool for brokerage industry leaders to kind of understand more in depth about where the industry is heading and to understand specific trends that they should be watching, and we provide the analysis and some of the research and data to give them the background by which to make decisions, informed decisions. And the report kind of has a time horizon of 18 to 24 months, so it comes out in December, but we cover the topics with that type of time frame. So we're covering from a broader perspective to give leaders kind of the perspective and the timing to kind of make broader decisions about the direction of their business. And this is, we start this, as you know, back in, it's almost a year-long process, and we're researching and reporting and talking to people and figuring out the trends. And as you mentioned, this first year as editor-in-chief, and we have a doozy for the first the chapter this year. And I know we debated back and forth. It is a huge, as I dove in, I was surprised at how big this was and how little I think industry leaders understood what's happening and what's potentially coming about a fundamental, important aspect of the industry, which I know is one of the focuses we're gonna talk about today. But that's the context for the report. And so this in this webinar, we're talking about the chapter we were waiting to talk about until now, which is compensation, which is a hot topic for some, but we think it should be a hot topic for almost everybody.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of the perspective of the report.
And if you missed our, I guess it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we did an overview where we covered a lot of the other chapters in the reports. I believe that's available for replay. So if you want to hear us talk about some of the other chapters in the report, we held this one back because it was such an impactful chapter, and we really wanted to have time to explore it just on this topic alone. So, why don't we jump into the topic? So let's talk about the FTC, DOJ, and the class action.
Should we give the disclaimer before we?
I guess we should. Absolutely. So we're researchers in this role. We're researchers. We're consultants. No one that is on this call, we're not advising you on compensation or your compensation structure or what you charge consumers, just to be fully upfront. So none of this is telling anybody what to do or collaborating on what to do. So we are simply looking at what's the state of the lawsuits, what are the implications of compensation changes. This is just for your own education about what is happening in the industry and what could happen so that you can begin to think and plan about it. should you feel you need to. So that's the purpose of it, but none of this is advising you on what to charge consumers or how that works. Everybody here is going to have to make their own decisions about their own businesses, their own market, their own plans, and how they're going to do things. So there's your disclaimer, Paul. So
thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure our council will be happy that I said that. So there we go. So yeah, so let's jump in. Thank you for that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the current lawsuits and some of the FTC and DOJ action. I'm going to ask Paul to fill in because Paul worked on this chapter and did a lot of the principal research. So he's going to fill in a lot of the detail on this. So I'm going to kind of cruise over it at a high level, and then he'll be able to kind of fill in the gaps. So the first thing that we'll start with are the key industry lawsuits.
Jack, I think it might be good to start with like a rough timeline, because I think that really hits the nail on the head of where we are, because we're kind of in the middle stages of something potentially about to happen. And because if you go back to that previous slide, Jack, I think that would be useful for us, because we have two significant things happening, and we're in the middle of both of them right now, which is the FTC and DOJ active review of the industry's compensation structure, with subpoenas to NAR to investigate how the structure is the policy-wise administered. And then on top of that, we have the class action lawsuits that are exactly identifying some of the same things that the DOJ and FTC want to review. And so it's these things together that are really creating like the movement and a lot of scrutiny at this specific compensation structure. Like some of the key elements are both looking at the same thing. So it's hitting on this dual front. And the decisions haven't been made in the lawsuits, and the DOJ and FTC review are it's like in a pending phase, because the NAR has filed to dismiss it, the subpoena, but the court has yet to rule on that. And so but all this scrutiny is suggesting like, whoa, like something, everybody is looking at this one structure. So like, so that was the idea for the chapter. What is the structure? And then what is happening now? And then what are potential implications? So I think
that's very good. And I know it's also timely because there was a negotiated settlement that fell through between NAR and the DOJ. That was part of what. We're right in the middle of that.
And I think if we frame this up properly, this is like the regulation. It ties into the regulation because the 2008. I mean, this helps. This really matters. This history really matters. It's the 2008 consent decree lasted 10 years between NAR and the DOJ. That ended in 2018. In the summer of 2019, the DOJ and FTC did a joint workshop looking at competition in real estate. Many of you might remember that.
Yeah.
And at 2019 is the same time. So right after the consent decree ends and the DOJ opens up the ability to review the policies of NAR, and like they have open season to go back and review things, the lawsuits come out earlier that year. So it's all kind of coming together. And then there was a new agreement settled between the DOJ and NAR, a proposed settlement that has fallen through. And so now the DOJ has free reign to evaluate, although NAR is contesting its ability to do that because of the agreement, but that's where we are.
Yeah, got it. Okay, great. So that's some history. We're caught up. Why don't you talk us through the class action lawsuits? Let's talk about those, because those, like you said, that action there started in 2019. So tell us a little bit about the different lawsuits.
These a lot of these cases originated in 2018, and they have some of them involved. So one or two have fallen away, and they started with the seller side, and now we have buyer side, essentially investigating the compensation structure. And they have a few, they resemble, their allegations are similar. Their scope differs, like the markets that they're focused on, and whether they're who they're naming it as defendants, whether it's MLSs and different brokerages. Often it's like some of the largest brokerages in the nation, and NAR is a common theme in a lot of these named as defendants. But some of the allegations, there's four that are kind of that we see in all of them. They're alleging that the structure inflates compensation because it's not clear how to. They're saying that it's not clear to buyers how they're compensating their brokers, and that it's a little bit confusing for buyers. they are alleging that they're steering by buyer brokers looking at the compensation offered to them by listing agents,
Mhm.
and they're saying, well, okay, they're only choosing the highest compensation and not the best property that may be for their buyer. And then the third one is the hampered ability for the buyers to negotiate the compensation with
Mhm.
their buyer's agents. And as I think everybody's broadly familiar with the way the compensation structure works, like the listing agent pays, offers the compensation to the buyer's agent, so it's coming from the listing side. And not in all cases do buyers negotiate directly with the buyer broker, even though, and there's, depending on the state, there's clarity about how they can negotiate that and the compensation structure ahead of time, and do they have a buyer representation agreement. But it's not always, the allegation is not always clear, and buyers aren't always understanding how they and when they can negotiate that fee that their buyer agent represents or collects. And then the allegation that the unilateral offers of compensation, as we know, that's a hallmark of MLS, the cooperation, is if you list a property in MLS, you offer at least something. It can be as low as $1 to a cooperating broker that brings a buyer. And they're saying, well, that you have to offer something inhibits the ability to do something else related to compensation, as far as on the list side and buy side. So those are the high level ones.
Yeah, high level allegations. Is there much difference between, because I have the lawsuits themselves. I mean, the seller lawsuits are more organized around saying, hey, this is anti-competitive, and that's their principal, kind of one of their principal claims. And the single buyer lawsuit is around the current kind of the commission structure and some of the things you mentioned, the inflated prices and other elements of that.
They have some of the same principles. They're just looking at the same thing from the other side. And let me stress, like, I'm not a legal expert. These are out there, but like these are generally understood to be the allegations. If you read them, they're like consistent and they follow the same theme. And it seems like some of these are they seem very similar. So these law firms are really, and we did a chapter a couple of years ago on these class action lawsuits. These are sophisticated law firms who were almost in some cases like ready to do an antitrust case, and they were looking for potentially to defend the plaintiffs to like fit what they were seeing as the potential opportunity for a successful lawsuit.
Very good. Well, let's talk a little bit about the National Association of Realtors policy changes, because this was part of the attempted settlement which fell through. So why don't you tell us a little bit about these, and I can add some color to these as well from conversations we've had.
Great, exactly. So these were made, I think, at the beginning of this year, and they were designed to respond to some of the negotiations with the DOJ. And one of them, the top one, is the buyer broker compensation is now like a public in the MLS feed that brokers receive, and brokers have the option to display that.
Right.
And in some markets, and MLSs have adopted that, and I think 65 is now, and I don't understand all the nuance of when all of them are going to roll out. But if you go to some place, like I know I went to Zillow in Denver, you see buyer broker compensation very prominently displayed, and that has not been the case before. And the question remains, what impact is that going to have? And it's along negotiations and clarity, but it does add that level of transparency that hasn't been there for consumers before. And it's not clear yet what the impact will be on that, but it's starting to see how the industry is already changing around the compensation structure without any FTC action or any lawsuit judgments or anything happening there. But we're starting to. These are big changes, you know, and what the
that information has not been publicly available historically, and to make it public is a big move. That is a big change. Talk to us about the second one, the how services are advertised, because there's some background there too.
Yeah, and I think this has been, you know, the challenge, like we talked about before, the buyer brokers. It's not always clear to buyers that they're paying for those services and how. And then in that case, some agents were potentially messaging as, hey, you don't have to worry about, my services are free to you. and that we can just work together and we don't have to worry about negotiating or and the terms of that language it varies, but that was one of the allegations in some of the lawsuit, and that was like a one NAR was like, hey, let's just make that clear, like compensation and buyers should be not advertising as their services for free. And so I think, I mean, you've been in the industry a long time. We've all heard the variations of that, or degrees of free, or like you're not responsible for this, or it was a gray zone. And this just makes it clear, like, hey,
much more black and white to say, look, the buyer's agent is receiving compensation. Their services are not provided, not free technically. There is compensation being paid, and the buyer is bringing the money to the transaction. So I think there's some clarity there. And then talk to us about the third one, filtering listings by compensation. I think that's this
addresses that steering potential that potentially existed in the structure by agents be able to go in the MLS backend and filter listings by compensation amount that they would receive from the listing agents. And in the allegations suggest that, hey, these agents were just picking the ones above a certain threshold, say like, oh, if they offer below 2%, I won't show that to my client necessarily. So it just makes it so that agents can't go on the back end of the MLS systems
and tune it and say, I only want to send listings that are compensating at a certain level to my client. So that's done. And I understood that was a feature in some of our MLS platforms provided by vendors in the industry, and that feature's now been turned off. So
so these are changes that have already taken place. The impact varies, like what these are, but these are already, the direction is, things are shifting a little bit. And I know we're going to talk about potentially what could happen as if it goes even deeper, but these are some of the things that have already happened. I think are pretty significant. Yeah.
So let's talk about the other, so these are all National Association of Realtors mandates that apply to, member MLSs and to membership. Let's talk about the industry and other industry changes that have happened to position around this particular issue. So why don't we walk through these?
Yeah. I think these are just, a lot of these are just firms saying, hey, we're going to start rolling out, for example, displaying the buyer broker commission that NAR said MLSs must provide in their IDX feeds.
Yeah.
And so I think those first three kind of deal with those. I think the most interesting is Northwest MLS. And you mentioned that the relationship between MLSs and NAR, and that's where Northwest MLS actually stands out, because it's a broker-owned MLS. And
they're not a member. Yeah, they're not a member of these.
Which means, as we covered in the chapter, which means it has more freedom and can act more quickly to make some of these changes, because they don't have to go through NAR approval, and they can make some of the changes that they feel puts them in a better position, because they can just act more swiftly. And I think they made changes to their listing agreements and their buyer agreements to make it much more clear about the compensation responsibilities on both sides. And I think we have a slide on that. And I think maybe you could talk to some more detail, because I know you.
I'll speak to that, because I looked at it, and I practiced as an agent, and as a member, as a realtor. The interesting parts of it in the listing agreement and in a buyer addendum that is an addendum to their buyer services agreement, both of them spell out what happens in the event that that there is in the event that the compensation offered by the seller isn't sufficient to cover the compensation that the buyer's broker has requested from their client. And this is the buyer's addendum is probably the most interesting piece, where it says all the scenarios, and it says I'm going to request whatever percentage. And if I'm not able to get it from the seller via their listing agreement, then the buyer is going to pay me the difference, or we're going to agree to a flat fee, or we're going to do something else. That kind of spells out all of the options that are there, and that form is now required to be part of what they submit to their broker, to say I've pre-discussed this with my buyer client as to how I will be paid as a buyer's agent. And that's a big change. I mean, that's a huge change.
Huge change.
Yeah, because
And
a lot of agents don't sign anything, right? They're kind of relying on the built-in compensation mechanism that is the industry compensation in many states. That's not everywhere, but in many states they just rely on that.
I think what Northwest MLS did, it's still, I think part of this challenge and part of this whole scrutiny of the compensation structure is that it's not an easy thing to understand from a consumer without deep industry experience. Even we are talking about this, and I can see it's like we're getting into the weeds, and it's like easy to get lost. But it's like not always clear that how like consumers understand exactly the responsibilities and roles within the fee structure, because it is a little bit tricky to understand unless you know it intimately. Like, okay, the listing agent pays this, and like you can negotiate in this way, and this is the responsibilities, and this is how everybody gets paid. And I think what's interesting about Northwest MLS is that it shows one way that when you decouple potentially listing agent fees from buyer agent fees, which is one way this could go, a degree of decoupling, because right now they're completely interlocked. Mm-hmm. And it shows like one way that the structure can be adapted to accommodate that, even though they're not decoupled, but it bifurcates it on the buy side and the list side. So I think that's an interesting one to review and dive into. But yeah, the changes, they made those changes in October or in early October. So any impact is yet to be.
Yeah, we're still tracking but I think credit has to go to Northwest MLS for coming up with a language and coming up with an approach to it that I think deserves it deserves scrutiny, and we scrutinize it in the chapter as to how they've constructed it. So let's talk a little bit about implications and what this means. And I'm just going to turn off the slides right now so you and I can just talk about this, have a conversation about it. Great. So I think from my perspective, we outlined some of this in the chapter. The implications depend on, like, we have a range of possibilities that could come out of either the class action lawsuits or regulatory, right?
I think maybe to zoom out 30,000 feet once again before we dive into implications, just like this is like brokers, like, why don't you think, like, how big a deal is this? Is like that this is a potential, like all this is coming together, and this sounds like we're in the weeds, but this is like these are huge forces really looking at this core aspect, $100 billion, over $100 billion each year in commissions, way brokers make money fundamentally, and agents make the bulk of their revenue. I mean, this is why we named it the top trend and top chapter in the report, because it's potentially, we don't know what's going to happen, but potentially this is foundationally a shift in the way the industry and the brokerage and everything kind of works. And there's degrees, and we're going to talk about that now, but I think that's very important. Yeah, it is. There's a reason why we put it as the #1 chapter. It's a core issue for the industry, and even a little change has a lot of downstream effects. It means a lot of things happen. So let's talk about that. So I kind of see this as existing on a continuum. On one edge of the continuum, it's if there is a ruling made that says the way that a buyer's agent is compensated has to be disclosed up front to the buyer, just disclosed, where that information is there, creating the opportunity for negotiation. Let's say that's one. Yep. Yeah, that in my mind, if I look at the implications, that's kind of the nominal step where we say, yes, the DOJ, the FTC comes back and they say, look, we're going to require that you disclose how the buyer's agent is paid, thereby giving the consumer the ability to negotiate what they're paying. Yep. What the buyer's agent is being paid, right? So if they say that's a nominal step, on the far end of the spectrum, I see that the commission structure, and this is extreme, and I'm no way saying this is going to happen, but you could see them coming back and saying, look, the seller agent or the seller pays their seller agent, the buyer pays their buyer agent, deal with it. Like there's no cooperative compensation, and that's extreme, and admittedly very extreme. But it is. But if you look at the spectrum of what's possible, you kind of have to think a little bit along the spectrum. And the thing is, while I'm not worried. I don't think you and I, in reviewing the chapter, we're not like, oh my gosh, they're going to go all this extreme edge. Even that first step of saying, hey, there's now regulation requires disclosure of how the buyer's agent is compensated. And I think sorry to interrupt, but I think an important element here is that in whether how it happens, whether it's NAR proactively or an FTC forcing us or the lawsuits, judgment.
Yep.
But I think, and I think you and I have talked about this, I think it doesn't really, some of these changes are made in Northwest Illinois already, but I think that a judgment or something action like that and mass media comes over and clearly explains this and what's changes, that's when the impact is like, it's like really good, spells out what's happening, and that's where the downstream like impact potential
a lot of downstream
really manifests through the industry. Yeah,
absolutely. The challenge I see is that we have an industry of agents that sell on the buy, that work on the buy side, and that do a lot of buyer work, and they're not in the practice of today necessarily having that conversation about here's how I get paid. Here's the services I'm going to provide. Here's how I work, all that kind of stuff, and establishing. Now, I think on the listing side, this industry has trained agents a ton. Like we've done, if you talk to a listing agent, they have a presentation, they have it down pat, they know what to say, they understand their value proposition, they can explain it well, they can explain their fees and why they are what they are, whatever they are. And I think we've done a strong job on the listing side. On the buyer side, I think there's a lot of buyer's agents that would struggle to explain all the things that which they do. I mean, that's the other thing. I think there's one of the challenges, I think, is that people not in this industry don't recognize how much work the buyer's agent does, and especially in the market.
It's huge.
In the market we just came through was incredible. They had to negotiate these multiple offers. They had to submit. It was a tremendous amount of work for buyer's agents. So I think there is from outside industry perspective, just a lack of knowledge about all the things that buyer's agents do to earn their commission, where they really are in great service to the consumer and providing a lot of help and support and assistance to make transactions actually happen. And but we have not necessarily consistently across the industry trained the buyer's agent to say, here's what I'm going to do for you, and here's what it's worth. Like here's the fee structure that goes with it, whatever that fee structure is, right? And that is the, I think, is the thing that the industry is going to just kind of cruise into when one of these orders come down, because there are, however it comes down, whether it's the National Association of Realtors, whether it is the DOJ or the FTC making a regulatory ruling, whatever it is, they're going to say, hey, you need to disclose all of this information up front, allowing the consumer to negotiate. Now, if you're a buyer's agent and you're accustomed to just getting in the car and showing people properties, and you turn in a contract and you get paid, and you don't really talk a lot about that up front, now you have to learn how to talk about that very quickly in a way that is coherent and that actually says all the things.
And I think what you're talking about is now we're talking about, we don't know what's going to happen, but being ready, and like we talk about T360, be ready. Like this, there's enough activity here where it's like, have some contingency of like, that's probably a good practice anyway. It's like, well,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
The institute anyway.
Yeah,
like some of these have ready.
Well, I want to comment on that. I mean, so I've gone on, a lot of our social media channels that are in real estate, and I've seen people commenting about like, because one of the things people ask is like, well, do you get a buyer's agency agreement signed up front? And if you go post that in any forum, you'll get a variety of responses, but you will get a lot of agents that will say, no, I don't have my clients sign anything up front, saying that I'm just not even saying how they get paid, just saying I'm representing you, just saying I'll be a representative. But if you go buy something, I'll represent you.
But in some states you don't have to, which gets into the nuance of
there's nuance.
It's like
but so the states that require it, where you're required to have an agency agreement in place, or the brokers. I think I was in a room full of brokers the last 2 days, running our mastermind sessions with them, and people that tend to participate in that, a little more progressive, not all of them, but a little bit more. And for the most part, they're like, yeah, we really work on this. There were some that confessed and said, yeah, we don't push on our agents enough. We did have 2 brokers out of the, I think 30 that we had, that actually required the buyer agency document in order for the agent to get paid. They said, we will not pay you unless you turn in that buyer agency agreement. You have to turn it in. So, and they're in a market that the state doesn't require it. So, so that's where I think the rubber meets the road, is getting agents ready to be able to talk about that with their clients and taking action today, and at least getting agency agreements signed and saying, I'm a professional. Here's the things I'm going to do for you. I just want to make sure we're working together. And then when we come back, if we have to come back around and say, now you have to talk about your compensation, great. They're prepared to talk about services. They're prepared to talk about fees and fee structure. And that's where I think we are right now.
As far as business models that potentially this opens up, if to whatever degree the compensation decouples from listing and broker, what do you see as some of the business models like potentially cropping up or gaining leverage or can be benefited by that?
That's a great question. So yeah, that's a great question. So I it does open a Pandora's box of, if people can be compensated for different things, does that reopen some of the work that the industry did over the last 20 years, where we tried to what it was called unbundled services for a while? That was a popular term in the 2000 2010 period, where people said, well, we're unbundling our services, you can do different things with us. So I think it opens that box up again, where it says, are there going to be agents that just show homes for a fee? Are they going to offer different levels of support based on a fee structure? It could open up, agents that choose to work via maybe a retainer, and then some kind of success fee, where they say, look, you'll retain me, you'll pay some money up front to guarantee that you're working with me as a client. And then there's a success fee if we actually have a transaction, and again, detail about how the success fee works and who pays it and how it gets paid, all that kind of stuff. So I think there's some implications in how the value proposition of specifically of the buyer's agent is presented, that kind of open up to other approaches to the business, some of which the industry has tried before and didn't work. By the way, the unbundled services didn't work. Like, that did not take off. We tried it before, right?
And if to a degree of decoupling and that conversation starts happening, then consumers might be more cost conscious, and that changes the dynamic of what kind of services they want and what's available and what they want to pay for. And that level that raises almost, because as we know, buyer's agents is the typical starter agent role. And so it raises the bar, honestly, of like what we have to provide. And then, are we just providing sewing service? Because I know there's a variety of buyer consumers, like, hey, I just want somebody to open the home. Like, I don't need to, or I want, and so that's to your point, it's like unbundling. Okay, I just want sewing service. And you want elevated service, you get, you can have degrees of this, whether it's a brokerage focusing just on showings or a brokerage offering tiered services. There's a variety of things that's going to open up.
It does. And I think historically, I'll say this historically, we don't know what's going to happen, but historically, consumers in real estate have chosen more full service. Like, that's been their choice. That has been the winning thing. They said, I want somebody who's going to act as my agent, who's going to take care of the transaction, make sure things are done, make sure it's done right. That's historically what people have wanted. I think this creates an environment where we get to challenge that again. That will be challenged again, and the fee structure of it will be challenged again and looked at and said, are there different ways that can be broken up?
And I think, talking about the listing side, the complement of that is, like, if these are really decoupled and consumers are really looking at the fees and negotiating more clearly on just what the service they're receiving on each side, that could revisit like how consumers negotiate potentially with listing agents. Like, they're making services. And so it's like, and it could potentially, like in a seller's market, that could adjust the compensation rate. Same thing in the buyer's market, because as we all know, the roles are to differing difficulties in those type of markets. And, like, there's a lot of depends on the degree.
If you're in a seller's market, the work is different than if you're in a buyer's market on both sides. So you have different amounts, different types and volumes of work. And the market we just came out of, the buyer's agents really worked very, very hard, because they were having to negotiate all those multiple offers.
And in theory, you would think, that's potentially they would make more, in that type of market, because it's harder. So
if they were just paid strictly by the hour, then
exactly.
And not to say the listing agents have work too. They had to be on the receiving end of multiple offers and negotiate them on their side. So it was work both ways, but it's just a different kind of work than maybe the market that we are in now, where there's less buyers and we're having, maybe a buildup of inventory. We might move into a balanced market again.
The last things to like touch on, and I think it's very compelling, is like potentially what this means for MLS. And I know some of us is already thinking about this, because compensation is at the core of cooperation through the MLS.
It is.
And we have an MLS chapter in the Trends Report, which is a great chapter. I encourage you to read it as well. But I know some of us are like, all right, if compensation becomes less of like we're guaranteeing on both sides, it decouples, that has a significant impact on the value and the structure and the place of the MLS. And MLSs are starting to think, okay, if compensation goes away, what else do we have? And like some of the innovative ones are starting to turn to data and technology, and so which is like arguably maybe a stronger, better value proposition for the MLS. But there's some significant, to our point, this is ripple effects across many core aspects of the industry, and MLSs are like right there.
Yeah, and there's one last implication I will talk about, which is if you change the structure. And you are a company that depends on referral fees from buyer's agents where you're sending those out, that will change the way that you do that. Like if you say, look, I'm only going to send to buyer's agents that I know how to make sure that they are compensated, because my referral fee, if I'm a big, if I'm a big lead generation shop and I've moved over to a referral fee model, I'm going to be a lot more picky.
A lot of them have.
Yeah, I'm going to be a lot more picky because it's like, well, my referral fee is at stake with the agent. Right. And so I think that will concentrate lead flow into agents that become very skilled or are very skilled at discussing their compensation and the fee structure and what they're going to do in their services. So I think that's the big gap. But if there's anything, if you're a broker listening to this, if you walk away with anything, it's that there's the agent, the buyer's agent in our industry will need a lot more support and help from you in learning how to sell their services and explain them and explain their compensation. Soon, potentially.
And I think the other walk away is like, and I think I can genuinely say, I think reading this chapter is a must. It puts everything in one place like that. Yeah. It's like, oh, I don't know if you can feel the urgency in both of our voices, but if you read this, we present exactly the case. And I think any broker who reads this will be like, oh, I completely understand. It's like documented the timeline, everything's there. And it's something to be prepared for, regardless of what happens. It's a smart strategy. It's why we put it at number one. And I don't know if we want to talk about where they can get the report or. Yeah,
let's do that. So if you've been listening and you do want to get a copy of the report, we have it available right now. Because you are here, we're going to provide you with a benefit for doing it, which is we'll take $30 off of any report that you order. There are bulk orders available. If you wanted to order more, there's a little slider. You can slide it up and down. I think Chris Riley will drop in our purchase link into the chat. If you want to do that, that QR code also will take you there, and we'll send you a follow-up as well. This year's report, we've done something a little differently. The report is actually available now in digital. So if you purchase it within about a day, you'll get a link with a login and all the things you need in order to go get the digital version of the report. And then we'll physically mail you a copy if you order the print copy as well, the first week in December. So you'll have a print and bound copy like we've done every year. But the digital version, we felt it was so important to get this information to the market sooner. We moved to let's do a digital first delivery so people can get it as soon as we send it to the printer, we made it available to you in order to read it and consume it digitally over your Thanksgiving holiday. So there you have it, available now. And let me see if I can pull up the chat and make sure Chris has dropped in there. Yes, he has. Great. So he dropped in, it looks like you dropped in a bulk order link in there, Chris, for people that want to order 6. So if you drop in one just for the single orders, that'd be great for everybody here. Really appreciate everybody taking the time today and learning more about the industry and potential compensation changes to the industry. Again, we say potential because neither Paul nor I know what's going to happen. And we're not trying to predict the outcomes of legal cases or DOJ. At the same time, because T360 is a strategy firm, we work with companies on thinking a few moves ahead. That's our goal. We get people thinking a little bit ahead so that you can make changes now and be prepared for what is coming in the market or what's coming from business or regulatory or demographic changes that may impact your business. So we highly recommend you pick up a copy of the report. Also, I will tell you, we are doing private talks. I have one later today, even with brokers that are clients of ours or with MLSs or associations that want to bring us in to discuss any of this content from this year's report with them. We've got a lot of other great information, changes in MLS, things that are happening in the home investor market and trends that we're observing there, overall changes in home ownership and demographics. that could be very valuable to organizations that are looking to make big moves. So if you'd like to have us come and do a special presentation for you, we can do it digital, we can do it in person. We're definitely available for that, and you can reach out to us on that.
And I want to say, stay tuned, because like in the publications research division, which I lead, we're going to be updating this and tracking this for everybody, and providing the synthesis and the analysis at a level that we can understand what's happening and when. So stay tuned for that, because we're going to be tracking this one. This is a big deal.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for taking some valuable time out of your day. If we don't talk to you soon, have a great Thanksgiving week. Get some time with the family. I know I am going to. And Paul, it's always a pleasure. I'm so glad you led the project this year. You've done a fantastic job.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.